Welcome to Season 2 of Feeding Families on the EcoParent Podcast Network. And don't forget to check out the new season of our other top podcast, Raising Kids Naturally. But before diving into this episode, a little shameless self-promotion from my son.
My dad started EcoParent when I was in the womb. Now it's pretty much the only parenting magazine still in print. If you like the podcast, you'll probably like the magazine too. You can subscribe online. You might also be interested in EcoParent's online courses, especially the kids nutrition and kids wellness courses. Stick around until the end of the episode and my dad will give you a discount code. Enjoy the show.
Are you looking for a hands-on, nature-based education that lets students experience their learning on multiple levels? For more than 45 years, Oak Meadow has been supporting families as a leader and pioneer in homeschooling and distance education, creating rewarding educational experiences that fit your family's unique needs and goals. Their secular, book-based curriculum can be used independently by homeschoolers or through enrollment in their teacher-supported distance learning school. Discover the high-quality, child-centered learning materials you need to give your student a happy, harmonious educational experience at oakmeadow.com.
The Feeding Families podcast is all about food and nutrition for kids. We bring you new ideas and inspiration for your kitchen and answers to your food questions to help you overcome the very real, very frustrating food-related challenges so many parents are trying to figure out. I'm your host, Jess Sherman, family wellness educator, author, practitioner of functional and holistic nutrition, and mother. I want you to develop unwavering confidence in the choices you make every day. So let's get into Feeding Families. Hello, welcome back, families, to the Feeding Families podcast. Today we have a guest with us. We have Dr. Nicole Beurkins coming to talk with us. Now, some of you might know Dr. Nicole. She has a wonderful podcast called The Better Behavior Show, and she had an amazing career as a child psychologist. And we actually did a podcast together on the Better Behavior Show about children and behavior and mood and learning. But Dr. Nicole and I recently crossed paths, and she has transitioned into a really interesting role to do with nitric oxide. She is now the CEO of Berkeley Life, which is a nitric oxide company. So first of all, welcome.
Thank you. It's so great to be here. I love spending time with you and your community. This is great.
We always have good conversations when we chat. You and I have this shared passion and background for children and for bringing the worlds of psychology and biology together, right? And really understanding kids from the inside out and understanding, what they need on a biology level, a biological level, but also understanding their psychological needs and how to parent them and these sorts of things. And there's not a lot of people who do that. So I always was like, real connection with you.
It's a kindred spirit. It's like a sisterhood, those of us that are in this. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's like we've connected these dots that sometimes people are like, what's the connection? But it's so obvious in our minds when we see it. But then I heard, we started talking about nitric oxide, and I was like, oh, well, that's interesting because it must play a role for the people that I work with since you're so passionate about it. And I knew I needed to have you on this podcast, even though, the thrust of what we talk about here is food and feeding and the challenges around feeding kids. Nitric oxide I've learned from you, it's such a foundational nutrient that does not get the spotlight. So that's why I wanted to have you on to talk about it
Awesome.
in the context of a supplement, but also in the context of food. So start us off by why did you transition why are you so passionate about nitric oxide?
Yeah, I'll tell for listeners who don't know anything about me, I spent 27 years working with children, teens, young adults, and their families in clinical practice. Started out as a teacher way back at the beginning of my career, was a special education teacher focused on kids with brain-based emotional and learning kinds of disabilities, and then got passionate really about working with families. I had, parents saying, I need somebody to help me know what to do at home and how to parent this kid. And so went back and got my PhD in clinical psychology and really focused on pediatrics through young adulthood. from a very neurodevelopmental perspective, a very relationship-based neuro sort of lens, not a behaviorist lens, which is what most of like behavior modification and psychology and such is about for kids with challenges. And along the way, I, began to realize as I was working with all of these kids in my own clinical practice, and then also having children of my own. I am a mom of four. They're all older now, 17 to 24. But, they were young when I was starting my practice. And so I was kind of making observations with them and making observations of kids in my practice of how many of these kids would come in and their parents were bringing them in to see me for things like attention problems and behavior challenges and school issues and, all of these things. And yet, when I would take a really thorough history of these kids, virtually all of them had a history of things like chronic ear infections and extreme picky eating or constipation or hadn't slept a night, properly in their life. Like all of these physiologically driven things. And at the same time, I was noticing some things in a couple of my own kids. And I thought, wait, there's got to be more of a connection here. Now, that seems obvious, Jess, to you and me now, and maybe even to a lot of the parents who are listening to this, but you have to realize like this was more than 15 years ago. And even now it's not accepted in the mainstream of, mental health and, pediatric stuff that physiology and mental health are well connected. But this was, quite a while ago now. And it hadn't been taught in any of my, advanced training that I had done. Obviously, I had a PhD, I had a master's and a PhD by that point, hadn't been touched on. And I started going into the research literature and was like, wow, there's actually a body of research literature about the role that nutrition and physical health and chronic health conditions play in brain development for kids, in behavior, in learning, in all of these things that we call mental health. And so that it was one of those moments, like a defining moment in life, and certainly in my career, but also just in life in general, where once I saw that, once I knew that, I couldn't unsee it and I couldn't go back to practicing the way that I had practiced. And from that point on, I really practiced through the lens of looking at children and adults through a whole body perspective, that they may be coming into me because of symptoms in their brain, but their brain is intricately connected to everything going on in their body. And I needed to be looking at that. I went back and got a master's of science in nutrition and integrative health to be able to really understand the biochemistry and really be able to weave nutritional intervention into my practice. So did that for many, many years. And you spend enough time in full-time, very intense clinical practice. My practice specialized in seeing kids and adults with very, very severe challenges on lots of medications, really struggling. And it got to the point where as my own kids were getting older and my interests were evolving, several years ago, I started doing more consulting in the nutraceutical space, formulating for companies, really wanting to be on the forefront of using nutrient interventions to support brain health, mental health, behavior in kids and adults. And so that sort of all came together last summer when I was approached by Berkeley Life, which is the company that I'm with now. They needed a CEO. And they said, you have a background in all of these pieces that we feel is really relevant. And it was a big decision for me to leave the world of clinical practice that I had known to really take this on. But I also had a very specific personal connection to the nitric oxide piece of things. As you mentioned, Berkeley Life is a supplement company focused on nitric oxide support. And something that a lot of people don't know about me, it's not a secret, but I just haven't really talked about it a lot publicly, is in 2020, in early 2020, I got very, very sick and was diagnosed with acute autoimmune hepatitis, which is a very rare autoimmune disease, and had basically where my body was attacking my liver. I went into liver failure. I was very, very sick and very grateful that I had the background that I had in functional and integrative medicine, had the colleagues that I had to really support me. I needed a very integrative plan. I needed more allopathic medication and, medical treatment along with a lot of, nutraceutical support and other kinds of things. And one of the things that was absolutely critical in helping me turn the corner and heal from that was was nitric oxide. And it was not something that I had delved into a ton before that in my work. Certainly, I had learned about the biochemistry of it in my nutrition master's. I had dabbled in it in terms of some formulations and things with my patients, but it wasn't something that I was super focused on. Well, there's nothing like having a major health issue yourself to suddenly delve into the research and clinical practice with things. And so I became passionate about nitric oxide and its therapeutic implications on a personal level, and then began to bring that into practice. So then, when Berkeley Life was needing a CEO, I thought, well, this is a convergence of lots of things that I've done, including my passion for helping patients and practitioners understand more about nitric oxide and really the critical foundational role that it plays in physical and mental health. So my journey career-wise has been a winding one, but I truly believe, as with everything in life, the things that we do all lead us to what's supposed to be next for us. And so now I have just the honor, really, of leading a wonderful team of people committed to doing great things in the world, and being able to do what I love most, which is teach people about things that can be life-changing for them, empowering kids, adults, parents, practitioners to really take the complexity of nitric oxide science and boil that down into something that's understandable and that people can apply to their lives to improve their health. So it's been just a joy for me to take on this role. And I love doing these conversations where I get to talk with people who it's like, I don't really know anything about this. And I love that, because let's explore that. Let's help people understand.
Yeah, let's dig into that, and let's dig into it for like parents who are like the parents listening to this podcast. They just want to do the best by your kids, right? And a lot of parents, they'll ask me like, well, what about just like a broad spectrum multivitamin? Like, what's should we have a foundational blanket? And nitric oxide it's not in most multivitamins that you see. I mean, we get it from food, but maybe it's just to start by like, can you tell us about it's how it works in the body? And then I want to get into like food sources and what's the difference between a supplement and a food, and why someone might want to use it as a supplement versus just relying on food.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's start with fundamentally what is nitric oxide, because for those of you listening, if you've heard of nitric oxide, you probably have heard in it in the context of like fitness or bodybuilding or something like that. And nitric oxide is actually called the miracle molecule because it is so fundamental to every aspect of our health and our function.
There's another thing, though. I think sometimes people understand nitric oxide as nitrates and nitrites, which are like additives. So let's clarify that too.
Well, we will talk about how nitrates and nitrites are, the body uses those to make nitric oxide. So yes, we will absolutely talk about that, because nitric oxide is a gas that the body uses as a signaling tool throughout the body. So nitric oxide, it's this gas, and it causes our blood vessels to relax and dilate. That's called vasodilation, which allows our blood to flow freely and optimally throughout the body. The best way to think about this is health goes where blood flows, meaning when we have optimized blood flow throughout the entire body, guess what happens? We get oxygen and nutrients to all of the organs, tissues, and cells where it needs to go. When you don't have optimal blood flow, you're not getting the benefit of getting all of that oxygen and all of those nutrients that you're taking in through food or through supplementation to all the parts of the body where it needs to be. And actually, one of the biggest things that people don't understand about what leads to serious health problems and even death is poor perfusion, which means poor blood flow, poor oxygenation and nutrient flow to our major organs. And so whether we're talking about children and the research that's been done on blood flow and perfusion to the brain, for example, with the kinds of things we're talking about here, and there's been many studies done on the importance of blood flow to the brain in issues like autism, ADHD, anxiety, schizophrenia, the wide range of mental health things. But, we think about cardiovascular health. When blood isn't flowing well, people usually think about, oh, you could have a heart attack, or, oh, you could have a stroke, or you could have high blood pressure. Yes, all of those things, even down to things like cold hands and feet. That's a circulatory blood flow issue. So we need to have healthy blood flow throughout the entire body to get oxygen and nutrients where it needs to go. And that's why nitric oxide is such a foundation to everything else that we might do in terms of health and wellness. because fundamentally you want to start from a place of blood flowing well so that all the other interventions that you're doing are going to work better. It's going to get the things to where they need to be in the body. So that's what nitric oxide does, and that's why it's so important. And it becomes more critical to pay attention to as we age, because the body's ability to produce it reduces as we grow through the lifespan as we get older. So typically, people might think, well, so kids, their bodies, they have young, healthy cardiovascular systems. Their blood vessels are working well. They, can make nitric oxide in their endothelial cells that line, the blood vessels. The problem is that when you have chronic health issues, which many, many, many children and teens do now, and you have chronic inflammation and issues going on, that reduces the capability of the body to produce that nitric oxide, even at younger ages. But for sure, this is an important thing for all of you as adults who are listening. By the time we get to age 40, we've lost 50% of our body's capacity to produce nitric oxide through our endothelial cells. By the time we're 70, we're down to 10% of our capacity to do that.
Can I clarify, though? Is this irrespective of what chronic diseases we may have picked up along the way?
Correct. Yes. And if you have chronic diseases and chronic inflammation and other things, you're going to have problems even earlier and bigger problems, which is why most of the diseases and the health issues that we think of happening as, well, that's just what happens when you get older. Well, that's just, old age, really is tied back to decreased nitric oxide levels, because you don't have good vasodilation. You don't have those blood vessels optimizing blood flow to allow your nutrients and your oxygen to get to where it needs to go. And that's why we end up with the issues that we think of as we get older, with foggy thinking and memory problems, and maybe not getting our circulation not working as well, and having gut issues and having heart issues and all of these things. So the good news is the body is so wise and almost always has a backup system for things, right? And so with nitric oxide, we have another system that our body can use to create the nitric oxide we need. So all is not lost just because those endothelial cells in our body, as we get older, or if you have, younger people with chronic illness, their blood vessels aren't able to make the nitric oxide as well. But the backup system is that our body can actually make nitric oxide out of the nitrates that we are consuming in our diet. And this is super important, because if you think about what's recommended in virtually any of the well-researched and recommended diet protocols, right? Even if you asked if you have a 10-year-old at home and you said, hey, what are things that are healthy to eat? For sure, they're going to say things like vegetables and things like that. Well, things like dark leafy greens and veggies, those are things that we know in virtually every diet that's recommended are important. One of the fundamental reasons that those are important is because they are nitrate-rich foods. Dark leafy greens, spinach, arugula, bok choy, things like beets and celery, Swiss chard, all of those things are very rich in nitrates. And why that's important is because we eat those nitrate-rich foods, the bacteria in our mouth, our oral microbiome, takes those nitrates and converts them into something called nitrite. We swallow that nitrite in our saliva, and then in our stomach, that nitrite is turned into nitric oxide gas. So it's this really elegant backup system that stays in place throughout our entire life. That nitrate pathway for creating nitric oxide is effective in a 3-year-old, and it's effective in a 90-year-old. And so this is why focusing on eating those kinds of nitrate-rich foods is so important, because it gives us literally the building blocks that our body needs to create the nitric oxide that we need. And so we focus at Berkeley Life on teaching about and optimizing that nitrate pathway, because that's where we all have control. That's very empowering, right? We can't necessarily control the breakdown of our endothelial cells' ability to make nitric oxide over time with age, but we absolutely can control dealing with that nitrate pathway of making sure through food first. Obviously, you and I both take a food first approach of eating nitrate-rich foods. But I certainly understand, especially after being a parent now for 24 years and being in clinical practice for 27 years, that getting some kids to eat a diet rich in nitrates and plants is not necessarily the easiest thing to do. And so that's where the supplementation piece can come in, right? Of providing dietary nitrates through a supplement that then gives kids and adults the building blocks that they need to keep those nitric oxide levels high. So that's really, like, if you want to say, like, at its essence, why do we recommend that people eat lots of plants? It's because we want their nitric oxide levels to be nice and high.
Okay, I've got two things I want to clarify. I've got so many questions, but this it's such cool information. You're such a wealth of information. First of all, I want to get into the impact of genetics, but also just to clarify, our ability to create nitric oxide in our bodies decreases with age. If we have a child and we can manage their inflammation in other ways, can we expect them to have really strong nitric oxide capacity, or is there also a genetic piece there? Well, like NOS genes, like where does that fit in?
Yeah, I mean, genetics plays a role, certainly. There are a lot of genetic variations that can impact nitric oxide production. And that goes across the age span, right? For children and adults. So, some of them, and when we think about these genetic SNPs or mutations, when it comes to nitric oxide, really we're thinking about mutations related to the enzymes in our endothelial cells that are able to convert things to really, it's arginine, the amino acid. That's the other pathway, is arginine in our endothelial cells turns into nitric oxide, but you need enzymes to do that. And some people have genetic pieces that impact that. And so, of particular note, there are certainly SNPs related to nitric oxide that are associated with an increased risk of neuropsychiatric kinds of issues. We've got data showing related to autism, bipolar, schizophrenia. So those are particular things where, again, if you're having genetics run, or that about your child or yourself or your family, that makes it even more important. You need to be leveraging that nitrate pathway. You're going to have some impaired ability to create nitric oxide through that first pathway. People with MTHFR mutations are at risk of lower ability to be able to convert and create NO through that first pathway. There are certainly nitric oxide enzyme mutations related to risk of infectious and inflammatory disease that can impact that. So there's pretty robust research around how different genetic polymorphisms affect nitric oxide production, nitric oxide's use in the body. And so that's why, really thinking about this nitrate piece of things, it's important, even if you think, well, I'm young, I don't have any of these, genetic things, or I don't think I do. It's still important to be utilizing this making sure that you're getting enough nitrates.
Okay, so just to summarize, we've got two pathways. Two ways of making nitric oxide. One is in our body. Our body will make it through our endothelial our endothelial cells. And then the other way is from food, which is through our enzymes in our stomach, and our body will convert nitrate to nitrite to nitric oxide. So, how do we know if we have enough? Talk about testing.
Yeah, well, there's interesting. So, some of the things that can be indicators, like when I teach practitioners about what are some of the telltale signs that someone is probably deficient in nitric oxide, it's things like foggy thinking, things like cold hands and feet or tingling in the hands and feet, poor sleep, certainly any kind of cardiovascular issue, blood pressure. And again, and it's interesting because, Jess, if we were having this conversation 15 years ago, I would say none of these things I'm about to list for you are relevant to children. These are the things for the adults who are listening. Sadly, in 2024, we have an epidemic of kids now presenting with these cardiometabolic issues that we never used to see in kids. So seeing things like hypertension, which is high blood pressure in children, seeing things like fatty liver, seeing things like, type 2 diabetes. So these are all indicators as well. Dysregulated blood sugar, dysregulated blood pressure, any of these things are indications. Certainly, anything brain-based. So when we're talking about the kinds of kids, that you and I have a history of working with, these are kids with brain-based challenges. These are kids whose brain-based challenges lead to behaviors that we see. The behaviors are not the problem. We have to dig to see what's going on underneath that. There's always physiological issues and things going on in the brain. Nitric oxide is so key, especially in the developing brain, because nitric oxide is so important. It helps to mature the brain. It's part of the integration of neurons and the development of neural networks in the brain. It's part of neuroplasticity, which is that capability of our brain to rewire and to change. Nitric oxide actually also acts as a neurotransmitter. So there's all of these pieces that make nitric oxide really, really critical when we think about how a child or an adult's brain is functioning, and then the symptoms that they have based on that.
So if you're feeling anything less than perfect, then you should take a look at nitric oxide. You do include saliva tests with your test kits.
Yeah. So this is, those are some of the signs to look for. And then this is the beauty of it. You actually can test it. We have a 10-second saliva test. And it's so easy. And I do it with kids. You can do it with adults, because all it involves is just sticking the pad of the little test strip on your tongue for 5 seconds, get it wet. You fold it together. And then there's a scale on that comes with the test that shows you, depending on what color, what shade of pink it is, gives you an indication of nitric oxide levels. Now, I'll tell you, the vast majority of kids and adults will test at either the completely depleted. They'll say to me, I don't think the test strip is working. It's white. It didn't change color. And it's like, that's because you're totally depleted. Sometimes it's like a light pink, but what we're aiming for is sort of a vibrant magenta on there. And what that test strip is measuring is the amount of nitrite in your saliva. It's measuring, and that gives us an indication. You can't measure nitric oxide directly in the body. It's a gas that dissipates within milliseconds. So there's no way to directly say, at this moment in time, here's how much nitric oxide you have. So we use these measurements of nitrite that give us an indication, because we know that depending on your level of nitrite, remember, that's that building block that the body needs. So if you don't have enough nitrite, you're not going to have enough nitric oxide. So the test strips are super easy to use at home for kids and adults. And it's also valuable because you can test to see how much nitrate content your food actually has. And this is something that is so important, because I always take a food first approach whenever possible. I know you do too, but we recognize that for a variety of reasons, food may not be enough, right? Or a child isn't yet ready or able to consume some of the foods that we need them consuming. But what you can do with the test strips, if you think like, you know what, we eat a lot of leafy greens in our house. We eat a lot of those nitrate-rich foods she mentioned. Great. So eat a meal with what you think are nitrate-rich foods, and then test 10 minutes, or actually you would want to test probably more like an hour to 90 minutes after that meal. If that test strip doesn't pink way up, what that tells you is the content of nitrates in that food isn't as great as you think it is. And that's not your fault. There have been studies done showing that depending on where produce is grown, it has a wide variance of impact on the nitrate level. So, for example, beets grown in Texas versus New York versus California are going to have a wide variance of nitrate levels. So you can think, wow, I'm eating a nitrate rich diet, and test and go, oh, there's not nearly enough nitrates in here. And that's because of degradation in soil quality, in air, in water, and in the ways that, foods are grown. That has shifted over time. So you can use the test strips, 90 minutes after a meal, to see if that pinks up well. That shows you, okay, there were a good amount of nitrates in that. But that's where I think supplementation can be such a great add-on here. Yes, I want people eating a nitrate-rich diet, but I'm so committed to making sure that everybody's got healthy nitric oxide levels, that we can use the nitrate supplement alongside of diet. And the thing with the supplement is, because we produce it in a standardized way, we know exactly how much nitrate is in there. There's no variance. We know with the supplement you're getting the daily amount of nitrate that you need to produce nitric oxide. So it's a good 1-2 plan there of definitely eat your nitrate-rich foods, and then some of you may also want to consider supplementation along with it.
Oh, I love that, because I love that you brought up this idea that what we think is in our food, and it might not actually be in our food. It's all theoretical. Arugula, great source of nitrate, but maybe not, right? So I love that. And so I want to get into what's actually in the supplements. Before we do that, though, when we last saw each other, and we did that little a little kind of ad hoc experiment with breath to see, because that's another way you can raise your nitric oxide is through breath work, which is also super fascinating. And can you just give us the little 30-second summary of what we did?
Yeah. I mean, this is the great thing. There's so many ways that you can support nitric oxide. It's not just food and supplementation. Breathing, good nasal breathing, just like I've taught my kids in practice for years, calming and reducing, anxiety and keeping themselves regulated. And, I've taught parents that too. Good nasal breathing is critical for nitric oxide production. Things like walking and getting physical exercise. One of the reasons exercise is such a recommended mental and physical health intervention is because it boosts nitric oxide levels. So we want to be getting kids moving. We want adults to be moving because that supports nitric oxide levels. Good sleep is critical. Getting sunshine, we know that sun is important for nitric oxide. So basically, Jess, all of the fundamental things you and I have been recommending for years to people to support their mental and physical wellness, part of the reason we make those interventions and those interventions work is because they support nitric oxide production. So all of those things are very beneficial for NO levels.
And I'll just refer people back to episode 1 of the second season where we talked about this. All of the things you just mentioned as the nourishment needs, the things we do to nourish our kids, and what, how they all interconnect. And this is another. We can chalk this up as another reason why those things are so important. Is it another reason why mouth breathing at night is not a great thing?
It's huge. I mean, mouth breathing in general is a problem for nitric oxide for a couple of reasons. One is when you breathe in through your nose, you have the air going through those passages and the blood vessels and things in the nose that allow for it to be converted more effectively. But also, when you breathe through your mouth, you're drying out your mouth. And one of the critical things for converting nitrates to nitric oxide is the health of the mouth and the oral microbiome. And you need healthy saliva levels and a healthy oral microbiome in order to convert. And mouth breathers, by and large, do not have a properly balanced, healthy oral microbiome, and they don't have adequate saliva. So that is also, again, when we look at, we've had a renewed focus in the last several years on breathing and airway and those kinds of things in kids and in adults. And fundamentally, the reason that's so important is because of nitric oxide. And if those of you who are listening, if you have sleep apnea or if your child has sleep apnea, you absolutely need nitric oxide support. Having those sleep apnea episodes automatically depletes you of nitric oxide, and then that becomes kind of a cycle that's very problematic. So you want to be taking a nitric oxide supplement before bed or giving that to your child. You want to boost your NO levels during the night if you have any kind of apnea issues.
Hey parents, this episode of the Feeding Families podcast is being brought to you by the Canadian School of Natural Nutrition. Do you want to improve your health and well-being, but you're not sure how? Have you an interest in food and nutrition and the science behind it? Kickstart your health journey by learning the fundamentals of holistic nutrition through CSNN's Introduction to Natural Nutrition Certificate. This introductory certificate provides a great understanding of the links between health and nutrition. Successful completion can be transferred to the full natural nutrition program so you can earn your professional designation, title, and diploma. It's available at select CSNN branches. You can learn more at csnn.ca/holistic-family, or you can follow the links in the show notes. So you mentioned that nitric oxide is a gas. So how can we take it as a supplement?
Yes, great question, because we're using that nitrate pathway. So our supplement is a dietary nitrate supplement. It's basically taking that dose of nitrates that you would be getting through your beets and arugula and spinach and whatever. And we use a form called potassium nitrate because it's easier to just make sure that it's dosed well and we don't run into issues of, some people have challenges with some of those foods, like with oxalate content or things like that. So we use potassium nitrate, which is giving you that daily dose of nitrates that your body then can convert to nitric oxide. We also have vitamin C in there because that's very important. When you think about how nature packages foods, all your nitrate-rich foods also have a lot of vitamin C in them. There's reasons for that. So those are really the main ingredients. We have a little bit of magnesium, a little bit of B vitamin in there just to help with the absorption of it, a little bit of beet powder and fermented beet, again, just to amp that up. But really, the potassium nitrate is the primary therapeutic source of those nitrates. Now, I will say, because we're talking about kids and families here, the standard dosing for adults, and really in my practice, like I would do that for anybody over age 12, again, depending on body size, is 2 capsules a day gives you that therapeutic optimal dose of nitrates for most people. Some adults with other conditions can benefit from more, but the standard dosing would be 2 capsules a day. For younger kids, I always would start with 1. Just because that's what I do with kids, right? Very few things are actually dosed or looked at in terms of kids. So you just go, okay, based on their size, and their age, you just reduce that. So with littler ones, just start with 1 capsule. They're not yet swallowing capsules. You can open it into something. I will tell you, the potassium nitrate, like nitrates in general, you've got a saltiness to it. So I tend to tell parents like it's going to blend better with a savory food, or like if you're making a shake, something that goes well with some saltiness to it. But kids tolerate it really well, and I just start with 1 capsule, and then you can work up from there. With them, test strips are safe for anybody of any age, as long as they can get some saliva on that pad. You're good to go with that.
And so they're taking the potassium nitrate, and it's converting in the stomach to, as long as I suppose they have good stomach acid. So that was that part of it.
Yep. So you need to have a good oral microbiome to get those nitrates converted into nitrite. And then you need to have, good pH in the stomach to convert that. Obviously, therapeutically, there are things that we can do for people who, are struggling with those issues. I will say we just came out with a new product, which is a prebiotic chewing gum. Kids love this. Adults do too. A lot of people are chewing gum, but this is a prebiotic gum that you chew it once or twice a day for 5 to 10 minutes. And it rebalances that oral microbiome to allow you to optimally convert. So even if you're not taking the supplement, and you're like, I'm eating a nitrate-rich diet, I want to make sure that I'm able to convert it. The prebiotic gum is great. It's minty. It's easy to get kids to do it. And it needs to be in a gum format because we want you chewing it. We want to keep those prebiotics. So prebiotics feed the good bugs in your mouth, right? So we want to keep the oral microbiome bathed in these prebiotics that are in there. And so that's why when you chew it, they stay in the mouth and they help to balance that out. Our data shows within 4 or 5 days, you see a balancing of that oral microbiome that helps you to be able to convert that. So, therapeutically, when we use the whole protocol with patients or with people, what we're looking at is use the test strips, use the foundation supplement with the nitrates in them, and then chew the gum periodically to make sure that you're keeping that oral microbiome nice and healthy. It's pretty simple. Nitric oxide science can feel really complicated. And in fact, there's, many tens of thousands of papers out there, which is why it's so surprising to me that we never really talk about it. It can feel complicated. It can feel like a lot, but really there's very practical things, as we've talked about today, that you can do.
It's very clear now, I think. And I also really like the idea that you include the test strips in with your kits. Because I'll say, like, I've tried the nitric oxide, and I wasn't even waiting that long. I was testing for my 2 capsules, and then testing like maybe 10 minutes later, and you can see it go up. But now that I know what you just said, if you tested it afterwards and it didn't go up, that would be a really nice, clear indication that you need some support with the oral microbiome or the stomach or something going on in the digestive system.
That's right. And I think, the piece of it too is the test strips. This goes for kids and adults. It helps with motivation to continue doing something. There's almost nothing in the realm of nutrition or even medicine where we can have within 10 seconds feedback that tells us that something is working, right? Like, I think you've had this happen. I certainly have. You put patients on supplements or you ask them to change their diet, and they come back and you're like, so have you noticed anything? And they're like, oh, I don't know. I mean, I'm taking them. I don't really know if it's doing anything. I don't know if it's working. The test strips give you and your kids an immediate indication of, yes, taking this is making a difference. I can see it on the strip. And especially if you've got skeptical teenagers or maybe kids who are just like not on board with it, it's a fun, motivating thing to be like, hey, let's take these and then let's see what happens with this. And for us as adults, it's so critical too to just keep us motivated with it. Sometimes we wonder, like, oh, I have these things, like, should I keep taking it? Should I not? With this supplementation and this test strip, you can actually answer that question for yourself. You can take the test strip and see, do I need it or do I not? Oh, I ran out of it and stopped taking it for a week. Let me see, do I need to go back on it? Let me take a test and see. Oh my gosh, yes, I'm super low. And I think this gets to one of the things that people often ask is, well, how long do I have to take the supplement for? And that's like asking the question, how long do I have to eat vegetables for? Your body needs a source of nitrates every day. So whether you're getting that through food, you wouldn't say, well, let me eat a salad once every 2 weeks, or let me eat a salad every day for a month and then not eat salad anymore, right? Because we know we need those things, on a regular basis. So it's the same with the supplement. You need to continue taking it because your body uses up those sources of nitrates on a 24-hour basis. And so you want to be able to continue to replenish that, whether that's through food or supplementation or both.
Yeah, I think it's also a really cool way to open up conversation with your kids around how your body works and what it needs and the feedback that it gives you. And, you know, we don't always just want to give our kids stuff. Be like, here, take this. We want to teach them how to nourish their bodies. And this is a really a nice inroad to having that conversation. Let's see if our arugula actually has the nitrate, right? Let's see how our bodies are doing.
Right. Let's see how your mouth is doing, right? Let's see, if you have a kid who's like kind of refusing any kind of oral care or whatever, you can say, oh, well, let's see, because guess what? If that test strip isn't pinking up, what that tells you is their oral microbiome's not great. And you can say, hey, we need to do some different things to take care of our mouth here. Our mouth is not super happy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So what I got from one of the things you said was that if, let's say, we have a really healthy diet, we find out that we haven't hit the 40 age group yet, and we find out that we have low nitric oxide. We take some supplementation for a month or so. Things are looking okay. Can we expect the body to like actually rebound and like be doing okay for a while as long as we maintain that daily dose of like not supplementation, but like good food?
It totally depends. It's possible because the more that you support nitric oxide production, the more you can help make some of those enzymes work better if they weren't working better before. Generally speaking, though, over that late 30s, 40-year-old mark, you're going to want to boost with some kind of supplementation. You really just can't rely on diet at that point for the vast majority of people. But yeah, up until then, sure. And I'm a fan of with all supplementation. I mean, virtually all supplementation that I've ever recommended for kids and adults. We use it to the extent that we need it, right? Not everything needs to be taken all the time. So if you're in that younger age group and you're like, wow, I was really depleted. I got that up, with supplementation. I'm now eating more of a nitrate-rich diet. I've tested to make sure that, the foods that I'm eating actually do have enough nitrates. Maybe I'm back to exercising a bit more. Maybe it's the summer and I'm outside more, all of those things. Yeah, you may not need it at certain periods of time. But I think that's, to your point, where the test strips are so nice to just keep up with that. And I will say, for all the parents listening, one of the first things adults tend to notice when they start supporting their nitric oxide levels is an increase in energy. People say, wow, I just feel younger like I used to feel. And who among us as a mom or a dad, as a busy parent, can't benefit from feeling better and more energetic ourselves? Now, certainly it has a host of other benefits for us, but I just say that on a very, very practical level. Many parents I've worked with over the years just feel so exhausted, right? Especially if you are parenting a child who has some extra needs or challenges. The energy and just the fortitude that you're able to bring to the day and to the situation makes such a difference. And yet we're feeling exhausted and depleted for so many good reasons. And so to me, even if we didn't look at any of this for kids and just said, how can we support nitric oxide levels in parents when we have more energy, when our blood flow is working better, when our brain is more online and able to focus and think clearly, we're able to engage with our kids in ways that better support them and help them stay regulated. And so I just think that's important to mention, especially for people who may be listening who just feel so worn out and so exhausted. You may want to look at a foundation of some nitric oxide support just to help your physiology, be able to manage all the stresses and the strains better.
Yeah, I certainly felt that. And also just a little bit mentally, I don't know what the word is. It's not clarity, but just like a little bit more like I could.
Yeah, sharper, a little bit more there. I noticed, like, when I noticed, well, obviously I was in the midst of, being really sick when I first started taking it. But then, even now, if I'm like, oh, let me just stop taking it for a couple days just to see, because I like to experiment with that sometimes, that's when I notice how much it's doing for my cognition and my energy. When you stop and you get a few days out and you're like, oh yeah, no, I'm not as on the ball. Like, my brain's not as sharp, or I don't have as much energy. And I think those are good things for all of us to do. Sometimes you go, oh, I don't know, how I'm feeling or whatever, and you stop and then you realize what it was doing for you. So I just think, parents in today's world can use all of the supports that they can get. And when we're doing well and feeling well, that has such an impact on our children. And so I know, just as your philosophy and approach, same as mine, for all my years of working with families, my priority was actually making sure that the adults were taken care of. Because what I know about kids is when the adults are healthy and regulated and feeling and functioning well, then that allows kids to feel and function better too. So all the things we can do for ourselves, I'm all about it, because we need all the help we can get.
Yep. And then sometimes when we're doing it for ourselves, and then our kids get curious, like, what are these things you're doing? Yeah. Oh gosh, I could keep you here all day. But thank you for all of this. It really clarified and simplified something that sounds, like you say, sounds complicated. Um, but it's really foundational to our health. So I appreciate the simplicity and the complexity of it. So thank you for that. Now, where can people find? It's Berkeley Life is the company that you are running.
Yeah. Yep. So you can find the thing, berkeleylife.com. And I know we've got a special link and opportunity for your listeners. You can put the link to that in your show notes, and you've got a code that they can use at berkeleylife.com that will allow them, because we are a healthcare practitioner company. So because you're a healthcare practitioner, we can offer this to your audience of people, that they can use your code to be able to get the products for themselves, for their kids, for their family.
Yeah. And I would encourage people, if you want to give this a try, I would say give it a solid month. And the test kits are included in the packets, and just go for it for a little while, and then you can decide what you want to do from there. But yeah, thank you for that opportunity.
Thank you. Always a joy.
If you enjoyed this podcast, be sure to subscribe, and if you feel called to, share it with another family who needs to hear it. There are more tools from me at jesssherman.com/learn and jesssherman.com/membership, alongside all the great resources you'll find at EcoParent. Things are changing for kids, and the more we come together in conversation as parents, the more we can find ease and joy as we raise the next generation together. I look forward to seeing you back here next time. Until then, keep at it. You have the most important job in the world.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed the episode. If so, please consider leaving a review and subscribing to the podcast. If you think this podcast is great, our host, Jess Sherman, has condensed everything you need to know to nourish your family into a truly fantastic 7-hour video course. You can learn more at ecoparent.ca/learn. It will change the way you think about feeding your family. You might also be interested in our Kids Wellness course, taught by Dr. Leslie Solomonian. As a thank you for listening, I'd like to offer you a 15% discount on any one of our online courses or any subscription to EcoParent magazine. Just head on over to ecoparent.ca, hit the Eco Shop button in the navigation bar, and use code FEEDING15 at checkout. All caps, no spaces, that's FEEDING15. Till next time.